you so much. Akam, I think it's very lovely to hear the explanations and the interpretations of the life of a constitution. And I think we're coming here together to I think learn more. And without much ado, I will introduce the two lovely resource persons that we have. I think we all know Chingya Litui. He has a law background, and we have all been fellow travelers. So it's quite an honor to introduce both the resource persons, brothers in this long journey from the region. I think we haven't met for some time, but the affection and also the solidarity has stayed on for over decades. And it's very different when you introduce someone maybe in your 20s, when you're young and starting. But I think all of us, the three of us together, we have a lot to reflect on these journeys that we have taken and what we have witnessed, the writings, the reports that we have done together. So it's an honor, and also I think quite a moment for all of us to reflect. How is it that we are all seeing one another in this journey, maybe growing all together, reading more, exploring life, having families. So I say that with a lot of affection as I introduce the two fellow brothers, I would say, from the region. So Chingya has had a long, I think, a journey in law, pretty much like myself. And then he went on to study, I think he do his LLM in human rights at the Columbia law school in New York. And he has worked a lot on activism, on advocacy rights. So I will also say that he has been very central to the Naga People's Movement for Human Rights. He has devoted and he's committed a lot of his time to that organization. The second speaker is, once again, fellow brother from the region. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Kamkon Swan. He's the current head of the department at the Department of Political Science, University of Hyderabad. And he finished his MPhil and PhD degrees from the Center for Political Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. And for I think more than a decade, we have written to one another emails, we have read each other's work. And if there's anyone on the region who writes on federalism, who writes on everything that is dear to us, that we should be thinking together, it is, I think, Professor Kamkon Swan. He is absolutely, I think, productive, and his op-eds in all national papers has done us actually, good, because he gives us visibility. He tells us how we should be thinking together about the region. And so we are, I think, very, very fortunate to have these two resource persons. I would just structure the session for us. So I invite the two speakers to take around 15 minutes each to share with us what is Article 371C, right? What is it? Is it words? Is it just a text? I look at the constitutional provision and it is one sentence. The president may provide for the constitution of a committee of elected members from the Hill states in the assembly and entrust special responsibility to the governor to ensure its proper functioning. I'm looking at that and I'm really hoping that we learn more about that. If we look at the Article 371C conversations, it says that it provides extensive powers to the Hill Area Committee of Manipur. And it is designed in a way for tribal communities to retain rights and control over their traditional lands, resources, cultural autonomy, and local administration. But this provision is also contentious because there are two views, once again, right, from the hill and from the valley. And I think the two resource persons are so much better, in a sense, to explain to us why it is contentious and in what context. From the valley's perspective, what does it look like? Does it threaten the integrity of Manipur, of the state? From the hill-based organizations and communities, is it really any form of right, or is it nothing but just pure compromise that it allows conflicting claims of rights to persist? And I would just say this very, I think, kind of, quick reflections on Article 371C. And perhaps if I can call upon Professor Kamkonson to go first, and then I'll call upon then Chingya. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dolly, for your kind words and for chairing, having agreed to chair. And thank you to the NPMHR for organizing this very, very pertinent and burning issue, which in effect unravel itself in very interesting and complex ways in the body politics of Manipur, right? So what I intend to do is to flag maybe two broad issues so that we can make a better sense of Article 371, not just as a bare law, but as a social document, which in effect try to entrench certain normative, political, and historical experience in ways which ensure the autonomy of territorially concentrated minorities like the tribals in Manipur, right? So what I intend to do is to look at Article 371C from two vantage points, that is to revisit the normative, political, and historical foundation of this article, and secondly, to look at some of the practical experience entailed by these constitutional provisions. So, as Dolly pointed out rightly, if you look at the BEAR Act, as it were, it has us two clauses, which would give you a sense that there is nothing much in the bare provisions of the law, right? Or the bare provisions of the constitutional provision, because you have a Hill Areas Committee, which in effect would represent or would be drawn from the hill areas of Manipur. And it would be the responsibility of the President of India to secure proper working of the Hill Areas Committee. So these are the two clauses, which are enshrined or entrenched in the constitutional provision called Article 371C. So in order to make this bare law into flesh or into a kind of a social document, it has to be read alongside Manipur Legislative Assembly Hill Areas Committee Order 1972, which give flesh to these bare laws, as it were. So you'll find that the mandate of the Hill Areas Committee is in effect elaborated in ways which would ensure that all matters pertaining to the hill areas on issues of development, on issues of the constitution and working of autonomous district council would be the responsibility of the Hill Areas Committee. So you have, in a sense, a kind of institutional, multi-level institutional provisions whereby a cascaded form of linkages is entailed by these two provisions, right? If you look at both the BEAR Act of Article 371C, read with the Manipur Legislative Assembly Order of 1972. Okay, so how do you make sense of this? So in order to make sense of this and to better understand why territorially concentrated tribal communities in the hill areas of Manipur need these special constitutional provisions, why at all do we need a form of constitutional asymmetry at the state level is something which would naturally come to someone who thinks through BEAR Acts, not just as bare law, but as a social document, which in effect give effect to social lived existence, right? Or life experience. So I would contend that these provisions can be made better sense of if we revisit the normative, political, and historical foundation of Article 371C, which is in fact much in line with other deeply divided societies where whenever you have territorial concentration of minorities, which is at the receiving end of the tyranny of the majority, you have a provision for constitutional asymmetry on matters pertaining to their intimate affairs, culture, identity, or land and resources, among others, right? So look at the Quebecois experience in Canada, or look at the experience of the Catalans, the Basques, or look at the Walloons, the Flemish experience in Belgium, you'll find evidence of this constitutional practice in play in deeply divided societies where territorially concentrated minorities, in effect, claim for or demand historical rights or historical protection. So constitutional asymmetry, that Article 371C, in effect, is deeply embedded in this normative idea that minorities, in order to realize the call for recognition or the claims and aspiration for autonomy, deserve certain institutional protection, which take territorial form. And this is well justified, not only in the case of Manipur, but as you know, which is provided for Nagaland under Article 371A, Mizoram under Article 371Z, Article 370 for Jammu and Kashmir in the case of India, and as I have spelled out in the case of Quebecois in Canada, in Spain, in Belgium, or you name it, right? So you have a kind of elaborate list that Manipur case of constitutional asymmetry in that sense caters to the normative demands of recognition, of ensuring that minorities which are territorially nested have semblance of institutional recognition and accommodation. So, and this is also something which in effect is foregrounded very well if you look at the historical experience of governing what we now call as the hill areas of Manipur. So I have always pointed out in earlier presentation as well as in earlier works that the genesis or the lineaments, institutional lineaments or lineage of Article 371C can be traced as far back as 1835, where for the first time, institution called a political agency was in place by the colonial Raj in order to regulate the affairs of the valley with the hill areas, because there was a lot of disturbance on law and order as it were because of the expansion of the colonial Raj, which infringed on the territorial autonomy or the autonomous societal culture that hill areas or hill communities have historically. So in order to better regulate a peaceful or cordial relationship between the two, the British has set up the political agency, in effect, which, as you know, is exclusively manned or handled by a British officer. Okay, so the British had to intervene in order to regulate the terms of relationship between the valley and the hills, in order to establish law and order, to establish peaceful coexistence in those areas which are, in effect, visited by, incessant waves of raidings, incessant waves of, overlapping conflicts over territorial claims historically. So this idea of a distinctive political institution was entrenched in 1907 when the scheme for administration of Manipur was again enacted by the British, which in effect institute for the first time a distinctive institutional administrative system called the Darbar system. The Darbar system, which is a 7-member administrative system to govern Manipur along with its hill areas, draws its vice president from Eastern Bengal civil service officer, which usually is again from the British bureaucrat, right? And the intent of this scheme of administration in 1907 is very clear in that issue of revenue, issue of hill affairs were given under the exclusive control or regulation of the vice president, who is drawn from a British officer, right? So the intent is underlined very clearly in the text of the scheme. If you look at, you have archival resource on that, which says that because of the cruel dealings that Manipur kings had with hill communities, and in order to bring the administration closer to the hill people in ways which cater to their developmental needs, the scheme of administration of Manipur, whereby the vice president of the Darbar would be drawn from a British officer, was justified. So ethnocultural distinctiveness, the very fact that they have this adversarial, cruel dealings between the valley kings and the hill communities, and the need to, decentralize power to the hill people was considered to be the rationale for having a distinctive institutional arrangement for the hill areas. And thus, fast it forward, and around 1946, when Manipur Constitution was drafted, you'll find that out of the 15-member drafting committee, you have representation from five from the hill areas. In fact, Manipur Darbar was represented just by 3, and you have the public representing just 1, being represented by 1. And this is a deliberate attempt before Indian Constitution of 1950 was enforced, right? You have a constitutional democracy which was enforced. And in order to, in effect, make it work, you have a drafting committee which draws substantial segment of its membership from the hill communities, which also ensure that what happened as an institutional arrangement ensure that you have a kind of a proportion of 30:18:3 representation from the valley, from the hills, and the Mohammedans. And that is to say that 2 out of the 6 Council of Ministers envisioned by this Manipur Constitution would be drawn from the hill area. So you have a semblance of power sharing arrangement in place before the formal loans of India's constitution. And I think these constitutional legacies, historical legacies of deeply embedded the distinctive institutional needs of the hill areas, in effect, is something which come into force when in 1963, Hill Area Standing Committee was established, when Manipur was, in effect, established as a union territory, right? So the Hill Area Standing Committee, as you know, is, in effect, considered to be a political offshoot of the Scottish Plan, which Jawaharlal Nehru, in effect, sell it, market it across hill community leaders, not only in the then proper Assam, but also outside of Assam, right? So you have this Scottish Plan, whereby, as you know, the Scottish practice of having you have this question called the West Lothian question. If you look at the British parliamentary experience, whereby the representative from Scotland, from Wales, and Ireland, in effect, had veto power on matters pertaining to their specific areas, right? So the Scottish delegates who represent the Scottish Parliament, when they were deliberating on British affairs, would be allowed to vote, but they can also veto on any specific laws pertaining to Scotland. Similarly, it applies to the case of Wales as well as Ireland, right? So this is the practice which ensured that territorially concentrated communities having long-standing historical experience of what Will Kinlecka would call it as autonomous societal culture, autonomous societal culture, which is territorially concentrated with distinctive institutional practice governing culture, education, religious matters, customary laws, so on and so forth, would be entitled to certain semblance of institutional protection. And I think this is, in effect, the offshoot of that Scottish Plan in play, which was institutionally entrenched, not only in Article 371C. I would argue that this is something which also informed Article 371A, Article 371Z, and the kind of arrangement which, in effect, entailed upon the autonomous state of Meghalaya, before it transitioned into a full-fledged state between 1969 to 1971. So you have a long institutional historical pedigree of envisaging certain semblance of institutional autonomy for territorially concentrated communities, including the hill areas. Okay, so these are political, historically grounded experience, which in effect now took the form of Article 371C when Manipur was created as a state. and you have a provision which was enshrined in the Constitution of India in Part 12 of the Indian Constitution. So, so this is a pedigree. Therefore, to have a kind of a very narrow reading of Article 371C as in a kind of automatic result of the creation of the state of Manipur would, in effect, would be too narrow as well as limited, because you have to have a broader historical or political understanding of how this constitutional provision was drafted as well as entrenched over time. Okay, so this is the first part that I want to flag. The second part, which I think is equally important, is to unpack how this constitutional provision unravel itself in terms of determining the contours of relationship between the hills and valley community on the one side, and between and within hill communities on the other side. I think the first dimension, which in effect, as Dolly also highlighted, is that there tend to be two very dissonant voices on ways of looking at Article 371C and how Autonomous District Council plays out in the hill areas of Manipur. One is especially emanating from the valley communities, which in effect become very vociferously articulate in recent times, and which in effect is informed by a deep unease or discomfort at the very idea of constitutional asymmetry, because they consider that constitutional asymmetry of such kind leverage, institutionalization of difference, and instead of promoting integration, it in effect unleashes centrifugal forces. And therefore, the very provision of Article 371C, read alongside the district council, in effect, are subjected to suspect and considered to be deeply, in discomfort with the idea of integration, right? So, the idea, therefore, is that Article 371C should be obliterated; it should be removed, in order that you do not have this, ethno-cultural embedded thinking, which again and again, become one of the important motifs of political discourse in Manipur. Okay, that's one way of looking at it. But from the hills perspective, Article 371C, in effect, caters to their long-standing aspirations, needs, and demands, although they think that these do not fully, dovetailed to ensuring autonomy. You cannot possibly have good terms of relationship with the valley communities unless you have these constitutional provisions. So any attempt, therefore, to pulverize or to obliterate Article 371C would be interpreted and therefore seen by the hill communities as infringement on their historical rights and attempts to absolve their very identity, right? So to kind of divest of the symbolic meanings and import that institutional provisions entail for constitutionally protecting their rights, as it were, right? That's another way of looking at it. But how does this unravel? If you look at closely Article 371C, read along with the Manipur Legislative Assembly Order of 1972. Look at the paragraph 4, in effect, which is very clear on this, which in effect entails a responsibility on the Hill Areas Committee to ensure that there is peace and stable relationship between the hills and the valley. So the provision of Article 371C is not, in that sense, a very exclusive arrangement which would perpetually promote centrifugalism, but there are also provisions which is often forgotten for political convenience, that the idea of leveraging cordial relationship between hills and valleys are very much a part of the intent and purpose of Article 371C. Okay, and look at other way. If you look at closely the intent and purpose of this Article 371C, read with the order of 1972, you also find that in terms of all developmental affairs or any legislation or executive action which might have bearings on Hill matters other than money bills, all matters have to be in effect referred by the State Assembly to the Hill Areas Committee for generating or soliciting their opinion. And it would be incumbent upon the State Assembly to accept, okay, the opinion of the Hill Areas Committees on matters which impinge on the Hill areas. So on practical experience, the kind of experience that we have are quite mixed on this front, right? So one of the most recent example of this not so cordial experience between the Hills and the Valley communities in terms of the actual working of Article 371C is that when the three controversial bills on Land Revenue and Land Reforms Act 2015 Amendment Bill or the Soaps and Establishment Bills was in effect, among others, was sought to be introduced, it seeks to short circuit the Hill Areas Committee by, preemptorily declaring that this is a money bill when it is not so, because matters pertaining to land, matter pertaining to culture and identity certainly do not fall within the ambit of money bill, right? But the Valley community, the Valley MLAs who dominate in the State Assembly, absent-minded about this entrance institutional or constitutional provision, try to short circuit this, and it has, as you know, unleashed a deeply problematic or contentious relationship between the Hills and the Plains. I need not elaborate on that. The second point, for example, which in effect unravel itself in light of a kind of a court decision, which in effect there is a court case which was brought before the Manipur High Court recently in 2017 by the All Tangkhul Youth Council, and the bone of contention is that what would be the remit of power of Manipur Legislative Assembly or government of Manipur to carve out districts which have direct bearings on matter pertaining to the hill areas. So the contention of the All Tangkhul Youth Council, for example, is that since bifurcation of district, 5 districts created out of Senapati, or of Chandel and Ukhrul and Churachandpur would have direct bearings on the cultural identity or on the way in which tribals are governed. Remember that these tribal districts are, in effect, arenas for district councils, where you have a semblance of institutional autonomy. And it obviously have important bearings on the administration, on matters pertaining to identity, on matters pertaining to development, so and so forth, because after all, administrative reorganization entails, far-reaching implication on governance, right, and development. So the High Court, however, for example, refused to buy the contention or argument of All Tangkhul Youth Council, saying that these do not have any direct bearings on the hill areas, and therefore, Manipur government is well within its right to decide the timing and consequences of district boundary reorganization. So this is something which also, in effect, give rise to a sense of, kind of dissonance as it were between the hill communities and the value communities in terms of the way they interpret administrative decisions which have important and far-reaching implication on governing local governance in those areas, right? I'll take a couple of points, then I'll conclude. Dolly, I hope I'm within my stipulated time. Okay. Another issue which I think I should flag here is, as in the light of what Dolly also hinted at, because I think this is this dialogue series is intended to be, one which reinforce the imperative of introspection among ourselves, right, among the hill communities who have important stakeholdership in the functioning of the district council, and for that matter, the Hill Areas Committee. Okay, So so we have to also be cognizant of the complex dynamics of relationship that Article 371C read alongside the the Manipur Legislative Assembly Order of 1972 entail, in terms of how it implicate on internal tribal relationship. Okay, so the recent experience on the working of autonomous district council, because this is important, because it is within the remit of Hill Areas Committee to ensure that the district councils are properly constituted and that they work in seamless mode, right? They work properly and in accordance with the provisions laid down by the order of 1972, right? So you'll find that there seems to be a kind of continual tussle or inherent tension between the district councils, the 6 district council in Manipur, Hill Areas, along with the Hill Areas Committee, because, as you know, the single line administration, which operate within a framework of what I only call it as cascaded autonomy framework, envisage a kind of diminishing autonomy if you go from the top down. Okay, from the top to the bottom, as it were. So, member of Legislative Assembly, for example, had been reluctant to share certain devolved powers to the district councils. So you'll find that in the history of the working of the district council, for example, although the Hill Areas Committee is in effect enjoined upon to ensure the proper constitution and working of these district councils, you'll find that many times, because of the parochial or selfish interest of members of the Hill Areas Committee, you have institutional gridlocks. And the result of which is that you have frequent instances of, not instituting, the executive committee in those places. Look at the recent cases of a kind of continual tussle between district council members along with the minister representing the Churachandpur District Autonomous Council. Or look at the Tamenglong, the experience in Tamenglong, where you have court cases, which in effect decided in favor of replacement of district council executive, who in effect were not towing the line of the ruling establishment. But because the ruling establishment were in a bit discomfort with this alternative leadership, which was flagged and which in effect went to the courts and which in effect won the court in their court decision in their favor, you do not still have institution of these executive members, despite having legitimate support from majority of the district council, right? So you have these instances which in effect impels us to rethink about the intersecting interest agendas of, on the one side, district council, on the other side of the members of the Hill Areas Committee. And this is precisely where we have to also be mindful about the way in which many times members of the Hill Areas Committee, in effect, give full premium to their party membership and somehow become absent-minded about the interest that they represent. That is the interest of the Hill Areas or the Hill people per se. And the result of which is that party interest or party loyalty often trumped, the interest of the Hill communities. And I think this is precisely where some sort of institutional mediation has to be continually, fostered in ways which promote better coordination between the Hill communities, their elected representative at the district council level, as also at the Hill Areas Committee level, okay, in ways which ensure and secure the full interest and autonomy of the Hill Areas. And I think this is something that has to be worked through by active engagement of civil society groups, by engaging human rights organization like NPHMR is on the limelight. And I think it is a matter of satisfaction that an initiative of such kind is taken. And I think this is a constructive agenda setting, in which you have to continually pressurize upon the powers that be, that unless we have a symbiosis of this institutional arrangement at work, which always do not work at cross purpose. Maybe because of the communal polarization in Manipur, any attempt to claim autonomy or to give more powers are, inevitably interpreted as centrifugal or as secessionist, which in effect infringe on the territorial autonomy. Let us remember, it is about time for the Hill as well as the Valley community people to realize that it is on the lack of institutional legitimacy, the way in which institutions are made to work so poorly that you tend to have inbuilt sense of insecurity, of anxiety, of a sense of mutual suspicion about the intent of political elites between the hills and the valleys. So I think this is something that we have to take it forward. And I think intervention of such kind and dialogue of such kind are very important in order to ensure that institutions work in ways which cater to the historical and political needs and aspiration of communities, in ways which cohere with the overarching institutional framework in which they function and are made to work, right? I'll end it here for now. I'll be open to the Q&A. Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is really helpful. And man, you are one knowledgeable person, Professor. I'm really enjoying this. I mean, you should see my notebook. So yeah. So I'll just shut up now, and then I'll give it to the next resource person, because this is such a fascinating, I think, dialogue to think together. So thank you so much, Professor Kamkonson, for enlightening us on this. And I think there'll be a lot of questions and conversations. So Chingya, your time is now. Take your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dolly. Thank you for the kind words earlier. Dr. Swan had actually covered most of the things that I also wanted to mention. So I don't even know what I should be talking now, because essentially all the points that I also had flagged, he has mentioned. So this would be more like a supplement to whatever he has shared. It wouldn't be so much of a brand fresh ideas that I'd be bringing in. There are a few things that I think we need to start by examining if we want to really see how 371C is supposed to be meaningful. One is the issue of, the first thing that comes to mind is the issue of, does Article 71C really encourage autonomy? What kind of autonomy is it that the 371C is trying to achieve? So if you look at the scheme of 371C and its associated HAC order of 1970, you see that there are certain powers, like Dr. Swan had already pointed out, functions that the HAC is vested with. How those functions are exercised, there are 2-3 things. Dr. Swan also just pointed out. For instance, the HAC, as he just pointed out, is also bogged down with the burden of party politics, as he said. Then there is also the issue of how 20 MLAs that forms the HAC is supposed to confront the larger 40 MLAs from the valleys. So those things are practical things that we have to keep in mind. Now, the other issue is when we talk about 371C, I think it's also very, very important that we also look at how the ADC, Autonomous District Councils in Manipur, function, because I don't think we can discuss 371C without discussing ADCs also. Why? Because one of the main areas through which the HAC is supposed to encourage autonomy in the hill areas, and also is to, one of the main things that is there in the order of 1972 is that they are supposed to overlook the constitution and the functioning of the autonomous district councils. How are they doing that? They haven't, as far as I know, the HAC hasn't really been, how should I say, very, very active in terms of how ADCs are constituted, how their functionings are regulated. So if you look at it, you have the Autonomous District Councils Act of 1971, and then you also have the 1972 HAC order. If you look at those two documents, there are also lots of overlapping roles and responsibilities. For instance, one of the overlapping functions that has been listed is jhum cultivation. Has the HAC done anything in regard to jhum cultivation, or has they done anything in terms of tasking the ADCs to look into jhum cultivation? So these are practical things that we have to keep in mind. The other issue is that if you look at how 371C is contextualized currently, if you look at it, it's this power relationship between the state and the MLAs, you know. So the way I see it, instead of delegating more powers to HAC, in many ways, the state is taking away, as Dr. Swan pointed out, like the 3 bills, etc. These are examples. The state has been trying to shrink the powers of the HAC by not giving funds, for example, practical issues of funding the developmental programs that HAC would propose, for instance. So these are all practical things that we have to keep in mind. As I said, Dr. Swan had touched a lot of the issues that I wanted to also point out. So I'm not going to really, I think I'm just going to let it be here for now. And then maybe when the conversation starts, I think it's better that I join the conversation, because there isn't really, since he has covered so much of the issues, I think I'll just take this very few minutes for now, and then maybe add on when we have the conversation. I think that would be better.
Thank you so much. This is so we have another, I think, addition here, which is the Autonomous District Councils. Maybe I will call for comments and questions. You know, we have audience here. We have a group here, which is a good number to start with. And so if you have a question or a comment, please unmute yourself, and it'll be nice to see you. So please turn on your video. Tell us who you are. It'll be nice to introduce yourself to the resource persons here. And please come forward. I think for friends who are watching this on YouTube live, if you have comments or questions, I request some of our NPMHR friends to pass that to us as well. We'll be happy to, I think, have them. So yeah, I think the floor is open, and I'll call upon our friends to please come forward with your comments, your questions. And remember, this is a dialogue. So, you know, any kind of experiences, I think, in terms of both the normative, the historical experiences, and at the same time, the lived experience that Professor Swan very, I think, well structured it for us in the conversation. So there is also a kind of a raise hand function on Zoom, which I use for my class. So you can do that. Otherwise, please, yeah, I would encourage you all to unmute and then ask questions or give us comments. And I would also request our NPMHR friends to come forward and, you know, share your experiences if you have any. Yeah. I'll wait for another 30 seconds and.
Yes, hello.
Hello, hi.
Yes, my name is Tigo Minlal.
Yes, please come.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to ask a question to Professor Khamkhansuan and the other panelists.
Yes, surely. Go ahead. Can you tell us what you do?
Yes. I'm currently pursuing a PhD from Tata Institute of Social Science in Mumbai.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
My question is on regarding the problems that the ACSC has faced currently in that the Speaker of the Manipur Legislative Assembly has ordered induction of 9 members from the Imphal Valley elected members. And if we look at the definition of the hill area per se, in itself is somehow problematic from the presidential order of the ACSC. And I think this has not been tackled very effectively to my understanding, to my simple understanding. So how as a hill as citizens from hill area of Manipur, this is a big concern, not only in this time, in the future also it might come up, the issue of this hill area, the exact definition, the legal definition of hill area. How should one tackle, or how should the legislative or ACSC members should take forward this problem? Yeah. The definition of hill area in the Act of Hill Area Committee of 1972. Yes. So how? Yeah.
Thank you. So I call upon I think the resource persons to take this question.
Yeah. Should I respond first, or Chingwo, would you like to come in here first? I think come in here, please. Please go ahead. Please go.
I think it's a question of technical interpretation of the order itself, because what is a hill area? It's very, very clearly defined. But the recent incident was more to do with who can be members of the hill area committee. So if you look at section 3 of the order, it says this, and this is the advantage. This is the particular passage through which the speaker was trying to justify. It says, there shall be a hill areas committee of the assembly consisting of all members of the assembly who for the time being represent the assembly constituencies situated wholly or partly in the hill areas of the state. So what the speaker tried to do was, some of the 9 members, what he said was, there are certain areas within their constituencies which are partly hill areas. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
that was so if you look at the provision, wholly or partly is the word that they latched on to use that. Now, if you go to court, for me, I think it's a very simple cut and try case, because the intent of the order of 1972 is not to induct members who predominantly represent non-hill areas. Okay.
Yes.
So that is I mean, these are technical arguments that we can use, but that was one of the arguments that I think some of the tribal leaders also put forward, and that's how the order was finally withdrawn. But yes, you're right. There is a lot of scope in terms of misusing it if you want to really push the agenda. So this goes back to the whole point of how the hill area committee is also subject to political maneuverings and political, how should I say, agendas that is against the interest of people in the hill areas. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you.
I think I'll put it this way. When we read a legal text or a constitutional text, which I hope Dolly and Chingwo would agree, we read not only at the text of the constitution, we have a contextual reading of the constitutional provision, as it were, looking at the intent and purpose of that particular legal text, right, as it were. So if you look at the recent overture of the speaker to clever to cleverly twist these provisions to justify or provide a rationale for incorporating 9 members from partly hill areas, right? The intent is clear, right? And out of the 9 members who are sought to be inducted as members of the hill areas, 1 was still yet to be elected, right? And it is, the intent is very clear. The intent, therefore, is how best do you twist and distort institutional provisions in ways which dilute the very foundation upon which such institutional provisions are enshrined. Okay, and here is a clever half attempt by the speaker to twist that very vague, ambiguous provision, and do it, forgetting, for example, the fact that such interpretation or amendment in the procedure of the rules of business of Manipur would require the assent of the president. I think this is very important there. And this is precisely where, because of concerted attempts from our elected members, Hill Areas Committee members, and from various political parties, especially NPF, which forcefully come out, in declaring the attempt of the speaker as unconstitutional, ultra vires, and which should be struck down. In effect, the speaker, did not need much time to get the political message in there. So I think so long as the Hill communities and our elected representatives are alive to the constitutional intent and provisions enshrined in those provisions, sorry, I just become breathless in there. So you have guarantee that these cannot be whimsically diluted upon the whims of an individual. So I think more on that, and regarding the ambiguities, I do not see that there is ambiguity of the law if you look at closely Article 371C clause 1, because it says hill areas, there is no whole or part there, right? When this legal provision was sought to be given flesh in the form of the order of 1972, somehow this wholly or partly crept in to the legal provisions, right? And this is precisely where I think alertness, political consciousness, and awareness, in effect, hold the key of ensuring that the intent and purpose of these provisions are intact.
Wow, that's really, I think that's very, very well answered, and we're all thinking about it together. And yeah, so I would request for more, I think, conversations that's there, or questions, comments.
May I?
Yes, please.
I think it can't be denied that current institutions as they stand, there's still a lot of room for tweaking and rectifying the current faults. As you said regarding HCC also, perhaps the problem with political belonging to a political party, how it takes precedence, right? I mean, perhaps that can be tweaked to incorporate civil society voices, be they elected or non-elected. That could be a way out. But see, basically what I'm trying to ask is how can we do better in terms of working with current institutions and building new institutions to that effect. I mean, of course, it's a very broad question that I'm asking, I realize, but how much space actually does Article 371C give to the Hill communities to create new institutions where they are missing? I think that's it. I'm not sure whether that's too broad.
No,
But
that's
yeah,
fine. It's thinking together. So I think that should be, yeah. I think that should be something that perhaps we can think about it together. So I would ask Kamkan-san, would you like to take this, and then maybe Chingya can also say something about that.
Yeah, I think to answer this, you have to go back to the the Manipur Legislative Assembly Order of 1972. Look at, for example, one of the section, the subsection which are entailed in section 4 of the order, which says that annual financial statement, okay, should be placed before members of the hill areas. That's one. And the second part of that is that all plans, 5-year plans, annual plans, should be vetted to the hill areas committee for their opinion, right? And it would also be incumbent on the state government to place before the hill areas committee the progress of implementation of developmental plans and schemes in the hill areas on a quarterly basis. Okay, it's very clear on that. But how many times have our HSC members take cognizance of the gap in those constitutional provisions? Have they taken up very forcefully? I think other than the recent intervention of Arthur, we have not seen any flash of imagination or intervention happening. And that become an easy pretext by the dominant community to hijack much of the developmental plans that are supposed to unravel in the hill areas. And the blame has to be squarely not only on the dominant political community, but also on a hill representative, that they did not do their work earnestly and honestly. And if our representatives do not do the work that they are mandated to do, then what is the role of civil society organization? What is the role of our tribal organization, ARTSUM, ANSAM, KSO, you name it. You have so many philanthropic civil society organizations which are supposed to zealously guard the intent and purpose of the Constitution, right? Probably we have failed in our duties and responsibilities. I think this is precisely where, so long as we have a kind of a concerted determination on the part of our elected representatives and civil society organization to actualize the intent and purpose of those constitutional provisions, this gap can easily be bridged. Look at the revelation, which the unstarred question that was raised by Arthur revealed, that out of the more than 21,000 crore rupees earmarked between 2015-16 to 2019 and 2020, hardly 400 crores was spent on the hill areas, which is less than 2%, right, of the budgetary allocations for the whole of the state. And look at this and compare with, say, for example, the Manipur State Constitution Act of 1947, which earmarked 17.5% of the revenue expenditure for the hills. Forget about these, Hills Valley budgetary allocations. So when it is a very pale shadow of what was even outlined in the pre-independence constitutional provisions, which are sought to be protected and carried forward in post-independent India, it would be quite, empty rhetoric on the part of the Valley community, for example, to roundly proclaim that Article 371C unleash centrifugal tendencies. It does not make any weight whatsoever. right? Such type of political rhetoric has to be exposed. And in fact, it is the failure of both the Valley as well as Hill community leaders who we elected to fructify these institutional provisions. When they fail, we have to account them for, right? So long as we are able to do that, I think there would be harmonious relationship between hills and valleys. And the question of territorial integrity would just be a distant pass. We need not be bothered about that at all. It is the lack of institutional accountability or institutional functioning, which in effect lie at the heart of this dissonant voice, which you see play out again and again in Manipur.
Let me just add by going back to what Dr. Swan had said earlier in his presentation. We have to remember that if you look at the history of how 371C came about, if you look at when the British were still governing India, and how after India became independent, how during the time when Manipur was still a union territory, there is always this how would I put it? What would be the right word? But this patronalizing attitude towards how administration and governance for the tribal people was viewed. No, so with that, if you look at 371C, also there is that certain sense of paternalism and sense of trying to give this sense of autonomy without really allowing us to be autonomous. No. So if you look at HAC, why it has been a failure? One is that there has always been issues in terms of funding, as I pointed out earlier. And why is that an issue? As long as you have funding issues, it is the state, it is the central government which determines what are the kind of developmental projects that you want to undertake, or what are the kind of developmental projects that you can undertake. So it's the agenda is not written by us, but it's driven by outsiders. So if you look at all this functioning of the ADC also, for example, and how it relates to HAC, within ADC, the fund, most of the fund is from the center. The state contributes very little. So a lot of the agenda that the autonomous district councils undertake is also determined by what the center allows them to do. And this, how do they control this? Through money. So in that sense, unless we try to reimagine how autonomy should work for us in terms of how we have to move away from this state-centric perspective, it will be very, very difficult for us to create new institutions. For me, that's my personal take. How is HAC important in this? Because HAC actually, if you the expanse of power for the HAC is very, very broad. If they don't have any political infighting, if they don't have any greed agenda driven by greed, actually they can formulate a lot of interesting policies and developmental agendas. If you look at the recent bill that the HAC tried to propose to the Manipur Legislative Assembly, which was ultimately not tabled, I don't know how. If you look at the bill, the HAC itself is now behaving like how the state government is behaving towards the HAC, So the HAC is trying to take a lot of the control away from the autonomous district council and keep that power within themselves. At least there's no checks and balances in the new bill that they have proposed. So these are challenges that we need to really, as a people, like Dr. Swan had pointed out, the people have to point this kind of flaws out to the HAC also, give our inputs in that sense. But unless we do that, it's going to be very difficult for us to expect the HAC to pave way for new institutions that will be helpful to us. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We are going a little over time, but are there any other questions or comments that are coming in? There's a question here from Atina, yes. So maybe I'll read out for the resource person. So it says, in a situation where a majority of the members of the Manipur Legislative Assembly are composed of non-tribal representatives, what are the ways forward for the HSC in terms of pushing for the amendment of the ADC Bill 2021? So Chingyat, would you like to answer this first?
I'll try, but I don't know whether one of the main issues with our representatives is that we are not very, very clear on technicalities. This is where, I mean, things come back and always bite us in our backs, you know. I think in the present case also with the ADC bill, the argument, of course, is that, oh, we did everything that is technically correct, and we have placed this properly, you know, that kind of argument from the HSC. But what I feel is that they also did not really examine the technical aspects of how to table the bill and all. And I think this is just one example of where, in terms of technicality, we're always lacking. We don't really consult legal experts. We don't really, I don't know, take feedbacks from people. So that's one major issue. So in this case, it's not impossible to table it, but I think we have to at least cover all our technical requirements first before we table anything. No. So, for instance, if you look at the bill, there are something very, very silly for me mistakes. No, in a law, even a comma and a dot, a comma and a full stop changes the meaning. There are so many errors in the text. In one of the sections that they have proposed, they want to build national highways. National highway is not the prerogative of even the state. It's in the central's list. How can the ADC build national highways? You know, how can they govern national highways when it's not even in the state list, but it's in the central list of the in the Constitution of India? I mean, very, very small mistakes like this. No, it really takes away the legitimacy of what we are trying to push for. So those technicalities we should be really, on the basis of sections like that, you know, even the bill could fail, you know, for me, in terms of legality. So those are things that we have to really mind. Otherwise, there will always be problems. So yeah, that's at least for me, to put it very simply, cover the technical aspects properly.
Thank you. I think we'll wait for the next resource person. Professor, would you like to answer this?
Yeah, Dolly, I do. I think I agree with Chinua to a very considerable extent that, you know, this Autonomous District Council Amendment Bill of 2021 is riddled with technical deficiencies, right? There are technical flaws because the whole idea of sub-state autonomy structure has to follow a certain pattern, you know, which I call it as a cascaded autonomy framework, because the kind of scheme of the Constitution is such that the kind of powers devolve to, you know, subordinate levels of governments is certainly all the time quite diminishing in terms of comparing with the higher level, right, which accrue at the state or at the national level. One of the difficulties, for example, with Autonomous District Council Bill 2021, for example, is the parallel structure it envisioned for the Hill Secretariat, for example. The Hill Secretariat would be controlled and regulated by the Hill Areas Committee, and the bureaucracy of which would be actually manned by Chief Secretary level bureaucratic officer, which I think would fly in the face of legal argument, because it will not just stay in the face of law, right? Because this is not what the constitutional scheme of things work. And this is where it will be shut down, right? Just in a matter of moment. And there's so many things, as Chinua pointed out, on developmental schemes, you see, you have like a kind of attempt to reclaim the power to recommend on building national highways, right? Fine, well and good, but as Tsinghua says, national highway is not really, the prerogative of the local government. Forget about even the state government. It is the prerogative of the national government, as it were, the federal government, as it were. So I think there are quite a lot of legal deficiency there, which has to be tackled. But I think what the Hill Areas Committee, and for that matter, our Hill communities should be concentrating on now would be on the special responsibility of the governor. That's, I think, one which in effect recur again and again, not only in the hill areas of Manipur, but in the 6 scheduled areas, including Article 371A and Article 371Z, right? So, the kind of scheme that is now in practice is, look at the Edwington Barre case of 1965, where the point in question is whether the governor in normal circumstances be entitled to full discretionary powers, right, when it comes to matters pertaining to the 6 scheduled areas. And it seems that in this case, Edwington Barre case versus the state of Assam and others case, which was earlier decided by the Guwahati High Court, eventually went to the Supreme Court in 1965. And the Supreme Court in 5-4 judgment come out with this idea that although the 6th schedule are or intended to be, special distinctive constitutional provision, when it comes to discretionary power of the governor would be bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So in the Edwington Barre case, what obtained was that a new district council called Zawai District Autonomous District Council was sought to be carved out of United Khasi and Jaintia Hills, right? And the argument was that since a commission of inquiry was appointed, which recommended for carving out Zawai district out of UKZA district, and given that the commission has fully endorsed that demand, and it was again approved by the Council of Ministers, and the Council of Ministers having advised the governor to do it, and the governor, having seen the file, wrote this rider saying that seen, thanks, right? So the question that came before the court was whether the governor used his full discretion in exercising his mind while, consenting upon the decision of the Council of Ministers. So the Supreme Court says that in normal constitutional convention, the governor is bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So even then, in the 6 scheduled areas, he would also be obliged to do the same. Hidayatullah, in fact, one of the important legal luminary who happened to be in that constitutional bench, differ with that judgment, and he says that given that 6th scheduled constitutional provision is intended to be a constitution within the constitution, unless you give full discretionary powers to the governor, who will not always be bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers when it comes to directly impinging on tribal rights or identity, he or she should be given the full leverage to use his or her discretionary powers. And I think this is somewhere that we have to latch on to, right? And this, in effect, appear and again when contentious issues like the 3 bills come into play. And thankfully, because of the concerted effort of civil society organization in Manipur, we have succeeded in ensuring that such anti-tribal bills do not get finally enacted. But can we set a constitutional precedent which are in effect in practice in these places? That's one, I think, which is very, very important. The second part is in terms of actual devolution of powers to the hill areas. Look at the original Act of 1971 when the district councils were empowered with certain functions. Out of the 17 subjects which are sought to be given to these district councils, 4, including forest other than reserved forest areas. sanitation, for example, public works, for example, had never been devolved, right? And look at now, out of the 26 odd subjects which are enforced by the District Council Amendment Act of 2008, which is in effect adhered to in the actual functioning of District Council now, you have as many as 22 subjects which are half or partially devolved. What would be the role of our elected representatives in fostering that these devolved powers are actualized on the ground? Okay, so what about, say, for example, on the allotment, occupation, or use of land, which is very important. You know that developmental, projects can only take place in equitable and in just manner so long as people have full leverage on the allotment, occupation of land, right? You know the experience in Nagaland, which Dolly has, very elaborately spelled out in his works, where you have multiple actors which intermediate access to land and resources. And Article 371A, I would still argue, is far better place because Nagaland Legislative Assembly is, empowered to even not apply, laws made by the parliament, right? But in the 6 scheduled areas and in the hill areas of Manipur, it is inconsequential because these sub-state autonomous structures have only the powers to regulate actual ownership, but they do not have the plenary power, as it were, the legislative powers to do that. And as you know, this has been confirmed in the famous Sitiwine Sawine case of 1973, whereby district councils are clearly seen not to have the plenary power to regulate on transfer of land from tribal to non-tribals. And the argument of the court is it is only the state which has the plenary power to regulate such transfer. So what would be the symbolic significance of having autonomy in the absence of this autonomy or of this power to regulate land and resources? It is an empty symbolism, isn't it? So your identity can never be secured unless you have the full leverage of autonomy to protect and preserve land ownership or even transfer of land. I think these are some of the areas where the Hill Areas Committee should draw its attention to, not on some of this, big political rhetorics of building Hill Secretariat, which should run parallel to the state government, by drawing bureaucratic officers in the rank and file of the chief secretary or otherwise. I think there are big lacunas there. But I think that the state assembly should be magnanimous. The fault with the state government in this particular episode is that it did not have the magnanimity to allow the Hill Areas Committee to introduce the bill. It should have allowed, but should immediately vet that for legal advice, and it would easily be struck down. By not doing either, the intent of the state government was in full play, and that was very unfortunate. I think the state government should have been more magnanimous on this.
Thank you so much. We are looking at the time.
Yeah, but I just since Dr.
Sure. Go ahead.
If you look at 371C, we often forget the second section, and which is the responsibility imposed on the governor to send yearly reports to the president. And this is one area where we can use to pressurize the government, because if you look at that section, it says that the governor has to send his or her report to the president, and the president can direct how the state should administer the Hill Areas region. I'm just pointing that out. So this is one powerful provision that the HAC can also use to lobby with, for all this. So that's one aspect that I wanted to quickly point out.
That's really helpful. Surely.
Yes, I'm Tasung Nyumai. I live in Shillong. I work for NCRT. I came in late, so I could not follow everything. But there's a small question that I want to kind of ask, because the resource person, Professor Son, has like been working on this for so long. I know about that. So one just small query. It seems towards the end of the talk, there was some comment that like the party loyalty kind of supersede or overshadow the need to like fully carry out the mandate of the HSC. So we have this tribal what do you call affair minister. Suppose if we actually make the HSC chairman become the tribal affair minister, and remove that as like redundant, and then force any party that comes into power to kind of like work towards introducing deal or making budgetary allocation, and then like all the party will then be like forcing them, because the ruling party will also have to, for reasons best known to them, that they have to continue in power. So they might as well like concede some of our, I mean, like, is there some kind of a tussle between like this ACC chairman and I mean, like in the power play, it looks like the tribal minister oversees everything, and this HHE chairman is just a namesake. He's just there. He can't do anything type. So can we? I mean, it's just a loud thinking. I don't really know how it works, but then I feel that if you make the like HHE chairman become the tribal minister, perhaps I think we can nail them down with so many pressures from different quarters, including the opposition party and things like that. How does like that sound? I mean, just loud thinking. I mean, like, because we're in a dialogue.
That, yeah. So can I also give so I would ask the resource persons to hold on to that question that came in, which is very technical. I hope you'll remember. And the last question, maybe for the conversation, I would just give it to you. It's on a chat box by Joel Rodriguez, and he's asking about Article 371C and the role of women, and especially representation of women in the assembly. And what about the Hill Area Committee or other institutions of governance in the hills of Manipur? Do they have women, participation of women, and how do we look at that? Because he's wondering whether are men negotiating with men for power, and what does it look like for the future of tribal women? Do they have a say in this very important vision that all of us are creating together? So the first question from, I think, the participant who is zooming in from Shillong, and the second question from Joel. So Chingya and Komkanson, please take it away.
Chingya, please first.
These are very, very broad questions, and something that I think it will actually require another whole Zoom session, the one by Joel Rodriguez, because the problem with electoral politics in India essentially has been that it's always rooted in this very patriarchal outlook towards power. So, and this is nothing is different. I mean, even within the tribal communities, unfortunately, we believe that our women are much more equal, but when it comes to actual representation, meaningful representation, we're also in the same boat as the other communities. So there are some, of course, currently there is one women representative in the HAC, but just one. That's because she happened to be elected from one of the hill areas, the constituencies located in the hill areas. Other than that, if it was a male, then there wouldn't be any female, no? So, I mean, these are very broad social questions that I think we need to explore more. In terms of what this autonomy problem is for women, again, that's also, again, a very, very broad question. And I don't think I'm in any position to answer that, because even for me also, this is something that I wonder a lot, no? But yeah.
Yeah, should I come in then? Yeah. Okay, I'll come first to the first question. I think there is no hard and fast rule that the HSC chairman cannot become tribal minister, because as you know, the HSC chairman is a cabinet rank minister in the state government. And there are instances in which cabinet minister hold more than one portfolios. So tribal affairs or tribal development is just one portfolio. He can hold several others, right? It depends upon the discretion of the chief minister of the state. So in that sense, I think your answer is, your question is answered, right? So, but would that make a material change or material implication on how autonomous or tribal representative work in protecting tribal rights or tribal identity? I think this is something that has to be worked through a process of dialogue, deliberation, and concerted effort. And unless this is fast realized, I think much of the land protection, already shaky as it were, would go down the drain, which in effect, as we see it most recently in the case of Kobru Hills or in the Chivu episode, you do not have a common stand taken by elected representatives. In effect, they sing paeans to the state government. And in fact, development seems to be more preferable to them than securing our land and resources, which is very, very unfortunate. And I think unless this is realized, we are in fact on for a much worse time ahead. On the issue of Rodriguez's question, in fact, very unfortunately, women representation never figure in district councils so far. Because if you look at the composition of the district councils, you have presently, you have 24 members, out of which 2 are nominated positions. And 2 nominated posts are supposed to be filled by the governor of the state from unrepresented tribes. And there is no explicit reference to gender at all there. So as you know, tribal society, despite this tall claim of equality as tradition, in fact, I have problematized this in one of my works earlier, and Dolly and Duncan has also has a full-fledged article on their book, Ceasefire City. In effect, these are driven by various complex as well as shifting political context. And this is very unfortunate because women, despite the fact that they are given equal treatment or equal opportunity, somehow got marginalized in the political sphere. And I think this is something that has to be worked through by also being attentive to customary laws, which in effect need desperate reforms, because you cannot perpetually disenfranchise women when it comes to, say, inheritance of property or inheritance of land in families which do not have, the male offspring, as it were. So there are abundant example of instances in which many families which do not have male offspring deprived women the right of inheritance of property and land and other things. I think this is about time that a district council, given the mandate to regulate on the allotment, occupation, or use of land, right, should seriously take this up in ways which can also ensure democratic justice within the autonomous framework within which we work. And I think the liberal defense of minority rights, in effect, is justifiable to the extent that autonomy provisions should also ensure for minorities internal autonomy to the extent that secure rights, dignities, and voice of people across gender, across tribe, across ethnicity, across class, so and so forth, right? And I think it is about time that we take these complex issues very seriously so that ours is a more robust one in the making. Thank you, Dolly.
Wow, we have gone beyond 2 hours, and I will leave it to the wonderful NPMHR members to make sure they compensate our two resource persons for their time. And this has been such a amazing, I think, gathering. This is the first dialogue in the entire series on Article 371. And I think the NPMHR friends are also intending to do the other states, particularly focus on the Northeast. And I think what they've started is something very, very amazing. We are very used to explaining our region to, to other scholars, whether it's in India or around the world. But what we are doing right now is also, I think, sharing knowledge and wisdom, within a collective and a community. Because one thing that I've learned as chair, listening to both, I think, our speakers and also the comments coming in, is how fast things are changing around us, whether it's to do with interpretation, whether it's to do with laws, with I think, with changes around us. And perhaps we do this, maybe an annual thing where, friends from all across the states can come together at one place and have this conversation. I think it's really key. And so maybe without much further delay, I would like to give the time back to the NPMHR members. So thank you so much. I would like to thank our two speakers, Chingya and Kamkanswan, as the chair. So the time is now for NPMHR to finish the dialogue, to end the dialogue. So Akam or John or Guan, who comes in now? The time is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dolly. You chair it beautifully. Thank you so much for connecting the dots and bringing, and also the ideas that we are running the show itself is coming from her. And we are indeed grateful for your advice and also for the ideas for this dialogue. And yeah, sincerely, thank you, Dr. Swan, for enlightening us this evening. I think this is something that we cannot just come together and talk in one sessions and go, but this is something that we continue to work and continue to live out through our conversations, through our policy, and through our thinking. And this is something that we all need to engage, and not only in the academic level, but also from the village level, with our parents, for instance, and with our sister, brothers, and something that we need to seriously work on. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Mai Chingya, for also bringing us a new perspective on, and also the failures that HHC and other areas that our leaders need to work on, and also for us to contribute in a way that we can. And yeah, especially thank you all the participants for joining with us today. And we hope that even in the future, you all will be coming and discuss together and have a good time again. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
And yeah, before that, may I request our speakers and also our senior members and NPMHR members to kindly stay back for a few minutes for short interaction. Thank you.